Welcome to the Future Proof Podcast. It's an old cliche that the one constant in life is change. Many companies are born from changes like new inventions or cultural and social phenomena. Many others fall by the wayside because they don't change when the landscape shifts and it turns out doing business the old way no longer works. I'm Joan Hamilton, and every week Inception CEO Farzad Dabachi and I talk about digital transformation and the promise of equipping companies with the insights they need to be agile and succeed despite change. Across America today, many companies are struggling with how to respond to shifts in buyer behavior, such as a preference for buying online. Sneakers and books, sure, but forklifts and chemicals? They're also struggling in some cases with a hodgepodge of manual and inefficient processes that are costing them time and money. At Inception, we believe digital transformation, or moving every aspect of your business that involves data to an integrated platform, is the essence of future-proofing. Without a clear sense of the now, it's hard to be agile when the future demands it. Just as important, when you create a more direct digital connection to your customers, you can perceive changes in their needs and desires earlier and react fast enough to thrive. Farzad, let's talk about what happens to a company when the ground shifts.
Yeah, think about what's happened in the last 25 years from all kinds of products that sort of meant something 25 years ago and they mean something different today, right? Take something simple, take water, right? We used to all drink out of fountains. We never went thirsty, but somehow it became a thing where you have to have a bottled water running around with you. Then it became a thing that bottled water was actually a thing, and then it became a status symbol. Then it became an important sort of fashion statement. Throughout all of that, who are the people who have their ears to the floor and learning those things on the fly, and who are the people who have no idea what's happening, right? Mm-hmm. And this is not the kind of thing that is sort of deadly and harsh to small companies. This screws up massive companies because, again, massive companies want to protect what they've got. And to protect what they've got is to do the same thing that they've been doing before. And that connection to the movement in the industry and in the customer base is not an easy thing to have for most companies today.
So when you hear the term future-proof, what does it mean to you?
Future-proof means to me that you have such a high bandwidth communication with your constituencies across the board that you're never going to miss any communication that is going to change your processes. So you need to high bandwidth communication with your users of your product. As they see things evolve differently and they talk to you about how things have evolved, you evolve. You need to have a high bandwidth communication with your suppliers. So as they see things, as they learn things, as they go through processes, you go and learn those on the fly and you react to them. So that high bandwidth communication, the communication is the requirement, and then the deciphering of the communication is the second part. Mm-hmm. And that to me is future proofing because nobody else can. But the thing that we have today that we never had before is you can have that communication bandwidth be very high and be real time, which causes all kinds of trouble for people because it used to be that it would take a month for you to get a letter from somebody that tells you something, or it could be that it would take a month for a customer to complain to a distributor who complains to another distributor who then tells you about it. So if you make that communication line as fast as possible and digital so you can react to it, you're future-proof.
What had to happen in terms of technology advances so that you could offer future-proofing to customers?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And I don't know that all that needs to happen has happened yet. First of all, we need to learn to communicate digitally. And I can tell you that most businesses still today don't do that. And I can also tell you that most businesses that don't digitally communicate with their constituencies actually want it that way. One of the things that is big with me, and it is ingrained in the system, is accounts payable, right? So one of the ways you make sure that you are managing your cash well is that you make sure your accounts payable department is just ever so slightly late in making payments. And how do you make those payments? You make those payments with checks so that they can actually take the time of 3 or 4 days to get there. So some of this stuff is ingrained in the system for so long that we think this is a competitive advantage because we don't pay as fast enough. So many more years to go with that. But basically the evolution of B2C, right? The evolution of buying stuff for the consumer, and certainly all the work of Amazon over the last 20 years has pushed the notions forward enough that now is having an impact on the business to business interactions. And that none of what we're talking about would have happened if it wasn't for those. Right during the dot bomb, one of the things that happened was there was literally a dozen companies formed to create digital marketplaces for industrial products. There's a company called Chemdex that did chemicals. There was a lot of these. And what's interesting is not a single one of them survived. And the reason they didn't survive, which is fascinating, is first of all, the technology wasn't there, but that wasn't really the key to the whole thing. The reason that none of them survived is that generally these large distributors bought several of these and they promptly killed them. So it wasn't in the interest of the industry, essentially, for this stuff to be digitized, right? Now, that's 20 years ago, and things have moved far enough where it's inevitable. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be stopped, right? We will not make all of our business payments with checks 20 years from now. We will, in fact, probably make none of them 20 years from now. But still today, 80% of them are with checks.
Yeah. And even, we've been talking about order entry lately and how more than half of all orders are still manual processes across the entire landscape of business. So faxes with bad handwriting and telephone calls that don't get returned and emails where it's written out in a narrative instead of, in a form. I mean, these things are not artifacts of the Middle Ages. They're happening right now in many industries that seem modern, and they're not.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that in the lighting business, going back to the lighting business, about, I would say 40% of the purchase orders that we got had mistakes in them. So you literally have two people that are sitting there reading purchase orders for clarity and then communicating back to the buyer, back and forth. So, and all you have to do in this case is get the buyer to type out the purchase order based on the requirements that you already have somewhere digitally online, right? It's very similar to Uber and Lyft, where you now actually physically type in where you want to go. So there is no mistake with the driver about where you're going because you said this is exactly where I want to go. In the old days, if you had a cab driver, he shows up and now you have to communicate, okay, this is where I want to go, can you go there, right? So can you do the interaction digitally up front so there's no misunderstanding? And in business, this is a problem across every single department, right? Can you make the communications succinct enough to reduce error rate?
Right. This has been the Future Proof Podcast. Thanks for listening.